Let's talk about the midpoint formula, which, as you can probably guess, is about finding midpoints of things. So what I have here is 2 points. I have point A and point B. And let's just notice really quickly that point A is 1, 1. That's the address of point A. And point B is 5, 3. Okay? So there's 0.53, okay? Now, I'm going to insert a segment here, and the midpoint formula is going to be for calculating the distance between two things, but really it doesn't even have to be a segment. It could be a line. I've drawn it in as a segment right here just for the sake of the example, but I could have just as easily drawn in a whole line, you see, and I would still be looking for the midpoint that would be somewhere right around in here. See what I'm saying? It's right in the middle of point A and B. So we're not going to worry about the line. Just for the sake of the example here, we're going to just do a line segment, but you can do it with either. So if we're looking for a way to calculate the midpoint, and you may already be noticing that this one, I've designed this problem really so that it's a nice easy answer, but in general we want to have a formula that works for any kind of line or line segment. And so in order to get to whatever that formula is, remember this is going to be a formula that works for everything. So we need to start looking at the distance that we're traveling between point A and point B. We need to look at the distance that we're traveling in the x direction, which is going from there to there, and in the y direction, going from here to here. And what I mean is that we're really traveling, and I'm going to try to highlight this right here. We're traveling in this distance, and so I'm going to turn this on to red so that it really stands out. You see that? And we're traveling that distance in the x direction. Let's make this a little bit bolder. Line thickness. Okay, so we're traveling that red distance in the x direction, and we're doing the same thing in the y direction. We're going from 1 to 3, and so I don't really need these points, but I do need this line to be red, and I'm going to make it a little bit thicker here. And so that's the distance that we're traveling in the x direction and the distance we're traveling in the y direction. Okay, do you see that? So I want to just take a moment and think about what that means. That means that we're traveling from 1 to 5 in the x direction, and we're traveling from 1 to 3 in the y direction. So what would be halfway, what would be the midpoint of that traveling? Okay, so we're essentially traveling this much. Let me grab my move button. We're traveling this much in the x, which is 4, right? And we're traveling this much in the y, which is 2. And so it's easy to see that halfway in between 1 and 5 is 3. So that's going to be my midpoint there. And halfway between 1 and 3 is 2. So that's going to be my midpoint there. And so if I follow this across, if I follow this across from my y direction, and I come over here somewhere, right along the point, and then I do the same thing from the x direction, and I come up here, I see those are going to intersect at that point right there. And it turns out that this point right here is indeed my midpoint. So I can get rid of these other lines. Let me get rid of these lines here. And I don't need anything but point K. So as it turns out, point K is my midpoint. And it's easy to see that because point K is 3, 2. Okay, so point K, oh come on, there we go. Point K is 3, 2, right? And if you think about it, look what we have here. The distance that we traveled in the x direction, we traveled from 1 to 5. And so the distance there was 4, and half of that is 2. Okay? So the distance there is 4, and half of it is 2. But we started out at 1, so if we travel 2 more in the x direction, we're going to be right there at 3. And in the y direction, we're traveling from 1 to 3. So the distance we're traveling is 2, and halfway is 1. But we're starting at 1, and so we travel up 1, and we get right there to 2. So the midpoint formula helps us calculate this actual location. And like I said, this is a really easy example, and I designed this so that the midpoint would be right there, smack dab on 3, 2. But most of the times that's not going to happen. So let's talk about how we actually use this in real life. So I've printed this out, and I'm going to talk about the actual midpoint formula now. The midpoint formula, as you might have already guessed, is simply the average between the two endpoints that you're measuring between. And of course, an average, as we have learned in the past, an average is just the sum of the values divided by the number of values. And so if we're looking at the average in the x direction and the average in the y direction, as you can see here by the red lines, we're going to be taking this, let me just write this out as x1, y1, and x2, y2, because each of these points has an x and y. And I know that this point is 1, 1, and I know that this point is 5, 3. But we're trying to develop this formula for the general case, for any points, okay? So this is going to have some x and y, and this is going to have some x and y. It doesn't matter what they are, it'll work for all points. So the average between the x1 and the x2 is simply going to be the sum x1 plus x2, okay, divided by 2. And the average of the y values at y1 and y2 is simply going to be y1 plus y2 over 2. That's just an average. You take the things that you have and you add them up and divide by the number of things. And notice that this is the what formula? The midpoint formula. And so we are actually looking for this point right there. That's what we're trying to find, right? So that's a point, and so that is going to have an xy, whatever the midpoint is. And so that's exactly what this is. We turn this calculation into a point. And that's the point. And this is the x, and this is the y of the actual midpoint itself. So let's look at some examples. And I'm going to zoom in. Okay, so let's look at this example right here. So the points that we have a point here, and we have a point here. And this point is 2, -5. 2, -5. And this point is -5, +5. Okay? So we're going to find the midpoint here, and we're going to do that by calculating the average. And so the average of the x's is simply going to be, and remember, we're talking about, and it doesn't matter if you label this as point 1 and this is point 2 or the other way around. So this is going to be x1, y1, and this is going to be x2, y2. And the midpoint formula, you see that? The midpoint formula says that we take x1, which is this -5 right there, that -5, x1 plus x2 over 2. And it says that we take y1 plus y2 over 2. And it says that we turn this into a coordinate. Okay? Well, of course, adding a negative is just like subtracting, so this is really just 5 minus 5. So let's do the math here. So -5 plus 2 is -3, so that's going to be -3 over 2, comma, 5 minus 5 is 0, and 0 divided by 2 is just 0. So there's our midpoint. So let's see if that actually makes sense now. -3 halves, 0. So -3 halves is going to put us at, that's a -1.5. That's going to put us right here, okay, right there. And 0, of course, we're on the line. Of course, if you calculate this and your answer is a point that's not even on the line, then you've done something wrong. But if you look at that, that is indeed halfway in between there and there. Isn't that cool? Let's do another example. Let's do one like this. Okay. So this point right here looks like 5, 3. And this point down here looks like -4, -1. Okay? So if we do, and it doesn't matter, it really doesn't matter if you choose this as x1, y1, which means I'm choosing this as point 1 and this is point 2, and this becomes x2, y2. It doesn't matter if you choose this is point 1 or this is point 2, the math will turn out the same way. So you can do this either direction and it'll give you the same answer. So x1 plus x2 all over 2, and I'm comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. So that's our point. So -4 plus 5 is +1, so this is going to give me a half. -1 plus 3 is +2, divided by 2 is 1. So there's my midpoint. 1/2, comma 1. So let's go up 1/2, and sure enough, that's it right there. And that is indeed halfway between there and there. Okay, so let's do something a little bit more complicated here, and we're not going to use a graph this time. We're going to just do it with arithmetic. Okay, so let's take this example right here. We're going to take this example right here. Okay, 2 comma negative 1 and negative 6 comma 0. Okay, so if these are our endpoints, and I have in the directions here these are endpoints, right? So if these are endpoints, then this is going to be x1 y1 x2 y2, and it doesn't matter if I choose this is point 1 or this is point 2 or whichever, it doesn't matter. So my calculation is going to become x1 plus x2 over 2 comma y1 plus y2 over 2. And so 2 minus 6 is a negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2. And then this is negative 1 over 2, which is just negative 1/2. And so there is my midpoint. All right? This is easy. Let's do it again up here. We'll do this one. And so if this is my two endpoints, then this is x1, y1, x2, y2. And so I'm looking at x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2, and this is going to be a negative 7/2, and this is going to be a negative 1/2. Let's see. Yep, this is correct. This 7/2 is the same as 3.5, by the way. Of course, you already knew that. Everything's checking out good so far. Let's do one of these problems where I have given you, changed it up a little bit. I've given you an end point and I've already given you the midpoint. Okay? So let's think about this. I'm going to slide on a piece of paper up here like this. Okay. So let's think about this one. Alright. So if I've already been given the midpoint, I'm going to have to do something to work backwards a little bit to figure out what the end point is. Okay, so it might help just to sketch a little graph out here to the side, just a little sketch graph. An end point is going to be 5, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2. And then the midpoint is negative 10. So way over here, negative 2. Okay, and so if this is an end point and this is the midpoint, then I'm going to be doing something come in this direction and then go in the same direction again. So I'm going to be way in the negatives, way down here, way out and down. Okay, way negative. So let's think about that. Okay, if we have x1 plus x2 over 2, excuse me. Okay, if we have x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2, okay, and that is our actual midpoint. Okay, and that midpoint is 5, 2. We already know that. Then we can just, because we're given the midpoint, see up here we're given the midpoint as 5, 2. Excuse me, the midpoint. My bad. Negative 10, negative 2. I just had it backwards here. Negative 10, negative 2. That's what we're told the midpoint is. Then we can just equate these two things and calculate what we have here. Now we're already told that one of the endpoints is 5, 2. And it doesn't matter if this is x1, x2, or y1, or if it's x2, y2. It doesn't matter. Just take your pick and shove it in here somewhere. So let's say it's point 1, okay? And so then this is going to become a 5, and this is going to become a 2. And make sure you notice that I've put it in the same position on both of these here. Okay? Even though it doesn't really matter because you're going to be adding, but just to keep it straight in your head, make sure you're just mentally kind of checking off, yeah, it's the part of the same point. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we just have two little equations. We have this equation that's circled in red and this equation that's circled in red, and we can now actually just do this. Okay, so let's just do this. Alright, so this equation is going to be something like 5 plus x2 over 2 equals negative 10. And this equation is going to be something like 2 plus y2 over 2 equals negative 2. A lot of 2's in there. Okay, so we can just cross multiply the 2. 5 plus x2 equals negative 20. And 2 plus y2 equals negative 4. And so then if I'm subtracting a 5 here, I get x2 equals minus 25, and subtracting a 2, subtracting a 2 right here, I get y2 equals negative 6, and so that means our other endpoint is negative 25, negative 6. And indeed, we knew we were going to be way negative in the x and kind of negative in the y, so this negative 25 and negative 6 makes perfect sense.